Now I'm just looking over some of my illustrious awards here. 3 Concourse awards, and I'm proud of them, needless to say. My Perfect Airplane Award, 20-pointer, whatever. There's a point to this, a very valid point. Obviously you're going to be someday, or you already are somebody who wants to win one of these awards. By the way, Arlie Presler is back to making these props again, and I really do appreciate the fact he's donated them over the years. I donated the trophies for a few years, and Arlie's basically done them all the years in between. Now, the reason I made the point of showing all these awards and shiny finishes is there's a word I want to reacquaint myself with here: butyrate. Over the years, and of course the years go back, God forever, people have been finishing models with butyrate dope. It's a very simple material to work with. 3608 thinner. These are the 2 primary materials that we're going to be working with. Nixon's on the phone. Let me go get it. Hey, that was a good phone call. That's the guy that's going to help me do my Christmas Village. And we're going to basically do a nice big Lionel Christmas Village real soon. So he's coming over for a consultation. Anyway, what I want to get, the point I want to make here before we go into finishing, if you choose these 2 materials and you basically do all your finishing with these 2 materials, you're probably going to have a lot of labor. Finish will be light, almost always guaranteed it'll be light. It'll always be a little more work than you thought it was, and it'll always buff out beautifully. And it'll always last a long time. Now, this is usually the scenario that I'm real happy about. I really like this. I'm willing to do the labor. I know the finish will be light. I know I can buff it out beautifully, and I know it'll last season after season. Now, what happens when you use other materials, when you go try in experimental materials, this is what can happen. You can get, oh no, oh Mr. Bill, oh no. Now what happens is, when you use other base coats especially, and since we're doing base coat now, one of the vogue things that's come in, and a lot of people are trying it, is nitrate dope. Well, nitrate dope is, yes, some people can use it, and you know what? Some people, Joe Adamusco happens to be one of them, Billy Suarez is another one, that have just gone crazy making jello out of a plane. Jim Damerel wasn't crazy about the way his nitrate dope worked out last year. So, if you decide to base it in nitrate, you know, this is maybe a problem, maybe it isn't. It seems like it's appropriate to use nitrate. Maybe Vic uses it and he has a lot of luck. In foam planes that have no open bays, it may be perfectly okay. Again, this is always a maybe. And there's always somebody who gets to the last coat of clear and the plane turns to jello. There's always people, of course, if you're using nitrate, one of the techniques of using nitrate is you go over it with auto primer. Well, the only problem with auto primer, George is using that on Tsunami, by the way, is it's relatively heavy. And if you don't put enough Flexol in it and fisheye killer, it can crack. You see the scenario here? There's a lot of question marks. So what I'm suggesting is if you go butyrate 3608 thinner, you're going to have, this is the one thing everybody tries to avoid. They don't want to do the labor. Yeah, but you know that after you put the labor in, it's going to be light. You know you're going to be able to buff it out like glass. And you know 10 years from now, look at the finishes over here, 10 years old, you know they're going to work. So my suggestion is, and we will use on the Spitfire, and I'm sure Joe will too, strictly butyrate finish, light coat, 3608S thinner, and on the open bays, where the plane has open bays, okay, where the open bays are, this is the only part of the whole plane that'll have shrink dope. The only place that'll have shrink dope is the tissue on open bays. That's the only place. So, having said that, I'm going to go mix up some dope and get cranking here. Now, as we enter the holiday season, every time I come back from work, my wife's been working in the shop making these flower arrangements, and there's shit all over the place, so I have to clean her stuff up. Anyway, this is her hobby. Oh my God, these things are all over the house. Just want to mention something. I got a really, I'll show these up on a video real soon. Got a really nice letter and a nice set of photos here from Bob McCarthy of Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. What's neat is, now these are people you never would have any way of meeting or having any interaction with. And he sent me a nice letter explaining what's in the photos, and there are some Spitfire photos. I'll show these up on camera before we go on. There's a nice little set of photos here, and I really appreciate people donating. I'll get these on a video and send it right back to them. Some neat things here. Notice the canopy. This is one of the ones that has a double canopy for training, obviously for training purposes. And I've been looking at the landing gear treatment here, thinking of some way I can incorporate this scoop and these radiator scoops. I'd like to make these radiator scoops removable. Again, have to see what Joe's ideas are on that. To have the squadron identification marks. This ought to look real nice on a model too. I know Joe particularly likes this, the red, white, and blue on the tail. Look at the front of this Sea Fury. This is just some of the things when you're doing some kind of a little modeling project like this. It's so cool. Other people can share it with you. Such a nice thing to do. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a Sea Fury in real life. It is a large aeroplane. And the noise that comes out of these exhaust pipes on the side is just unbelievable, that radial sound. There's another Sea Fury cottonmouth. Now just look at it. Look at this sequence of photos. Of course, they have the ability to raise and lower the wings as they're taxiing. Visually, this would be a good name for your next plane, Cottonmouth. Anyways, a couple more Spitfire pictures here. Just close this out. Obviously, all the people that have sent pictures in, I'll put them on the video and return them as soon as possible. And this is the one I'll close on. I mean, tell me that isn't cool. Visually, eat your heart out. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I will return it in good order. So before I get to work today on a Spitfire project, I had a really neat thing that I'll share with you. Only take a couple seconds. Is my friend Joe, who helped me move and was very helpful and instrumental in the move here, brought over a chair. This arm was completely broken off. I don't know if you can see how flimsy it is, but the other arm was broken completely off. I managed to fix this one with some thin CA, and what I did, I ripped it apart, sprayed kicker inside, shoved it back down, and just put thin CA in there, and it kind of hardened up real nice. That's solid as a rock now. Now what I did here, because this one was so big and there's a split in the wood, I don't know if you can see the split here, and this is a great little tip. What I did, I mixed up some of that old epoxy that we use for fiberglassing, pulled this all apart and filled all the joints with epoxy. Maybe you can even see down here how the epoxy's oozing out when I press down on it. And I'm just going to let this dry and see if it's strong enough, and if it isn't, you know, I'll go back and do it again with some more epoxy. Anyway, I have done this in the past and saved furniture that pretty much was going into the trash barrel, and I hope the reason I'm trying to save this is not for financial reasons. This belonged to her mother at one time, and it's kind of a sentimental piece, and I'm always glad when I can do these little jobs for somebody. Once that stuff hardens up, what I'm going to do is go around every joint on the chair with thin CA. Since they're going to refinish this anyway, it won't matter if a little extra gets out on the outside. A lot of times if the joints are real thin, if they're a nice tight fit, the CA does a great job of just filling the gap and hardening it up. And if it doesn't, you've got to pull it apart then and either use white glue or epoxy. Seems like the epoxy worked great. Now one of the things I always do, save your life. I always start out with a clean jar. I know that sounds pretty self-evident, but one time I started out with a jar that had garlic in it. I think if you go back to the '93 video, you'll see what happened. And I cleaned it and didn't clean it out, I guess, as good as you have to. And the paint for the whole plane, for the whole time I worked on it, smelled like garlic every time I put thinner in it. Never going to do that again. Clean jar. I marked the jar when I mixed the paint. November '95, this is light coat 3608S. Any paint that's in a jar, this is thinner. I already make it so I don't have to carry that 5-gallon can. Mark what's in the jar and when you put it there. Because what's going to happen, if I go into that closet, there's probably 10 jars of old filler and primer and red and green and blue, and Jimmy's plain and everybody's plain. And what happens is, then you're tempted to go and use old paint. If you learn nothing else from this tape, here's the deal. Brand new can of Sig Light Coat. Don't even think about using last year's paint up. It's a maybe. Now what I try to do is, and this is just roughly, I want to get roughly 1/3, and this is not an exact mix, believe me. Roughly 1/3, a little bit more of light coat. Remember, this is going to be the base that goes on the wood. And to this mix, we'll add a little bit of dope, but we're not going to add a lot more thinner to it. All right, and what I want to do is add, that's, I would say, a little more than what I wanted, but again, this is not a critical thing. It's not like you can measure this and every time it'll be the same. It's not going to happen. I want to put the 3608S in there. I always put a little bit of Flexol, even in the first coat, even in the last coat, every coat. Just a little, not a particularly accurate amount, just a little bit. And fisheye killer, 1 drop per batch is fine. You can see when you put the fisheye killer in, it kills the surface tension. It'll just make the fingerprints a little easier to deal with. So I hope this will be enough material. It's relatively thin, and I'll put all my first coats on the stab and elevator with this. Now the whole idea of this first coat, this is probably the most critical coat, is to get it on wet, that it soaks into the wood. If you've ever had one of those planes where, and I'm sure everybody has, where you've pulled up the tape and up comes the paint right down the raw wood, it's because this bottom coat didn't get a good bite into the wood. So putting it on relatively thin. I like to use a 1-inch brush, but obviously, you know, that's a personal taste thing. The idea is to get the first coat to penetrate. Get it on good and wet. And what I'll do is I'll get this on good and wet, let this dry while I'm out to work, get back early this afternoon, I hope, and get another coat on. Give it at least 4 or 5 hours to dry, to harden up. Again, you don't want to, if you put the coats on without letting each one gas off, you just trap thinner in air and eventually it gets difficult to sand, it gets chewing gummy. Really should let it dry a half a day between coats. Just some tips I think you can use. What I want to do, I want to show this. It's good and wet. Wet is the deal. There's plenty of thinner in that dope. Good and wet. No, it's a good idea if you figure some better way of doing it. I like to just shove a number 26 blade into one of the hinge pockets, because you need a way to hold this while it's drying. Well, I've seen so many people, boy, and including myself, you get a beautiful finish on a plane. Later on in a finish, you go to pull up the masking tape and up comes half of the paint and you want to cry. And boy, I'll bet you it's happened to everybody. I know it's happened to myself and pretty much everybody that's in the shop here working. It's happened to them at least once. Get that first coat on wet. Get it on quick and wet. What I'll do this afternoon, I'll come back, get another coat on. This will already be gassed off, and maybe by this afternoon or tonight I'll have another coat on. Give it at least 4 hours. If you're out in the Florida sun, of course, you could make it go a little quicker, but point is not to get the first coat on too thick or too dry. Or another advantage of when you put a lot of coats on thin. Keep in mind, it doesn't matter if you put it on in 1,000 coats, as long as you don't put too much material on. When you put it on thin with a lot of coats, what happens is there's no brush marks. There's almost nothing to sand, very little to sand. When you put it on thick and chewing gummy, what happens, you know and I know, and yeah, you can rush through and maybe get all the dope on in one day, but what happens is go to sand it and it's chewing gum, and you know you're screwed. So we're going to take the slow road to China here, try to get one coat on, let it dry well, get the second coat on, and little by little, if we want to, we could add a little bit of dope to this, but never add thinner. We want it to get thicker and thicker as it comes up so that we have that good bite into the base. Then after we do the filler, we'll do it the opposite way, add thinner to the filler. So, if this part of it is right, if the wood is sanded smooth and this coat goes on wet, what's going to happen after 2 or 3 coats? This wood is going to swell and it's going to get puffy in different spots, and we're going to have to block sand it back out just a little bit. But later on in the program, this is cheap insurance. Okay, the trick here is now don't rush into the second coat. Give this plenty of time to dry. We will do that, and we'll see you this afternoon after we do a session over at the shop. Now, even after one coat, this wood has become a little rougher than it was before. So what I'm going to do, without further ado, get right into this. Give everything a second coat. And I hope tomorrow, you know, this will be ready for maybe a 3rd and 4th coat. But I think more than 2 coats a day, you work yourself into a problem. You work into that problem of making jello. Another problem that a lot of people have is they don't put enough base on underneath the tissue. Common problem. They think, oh, I'll save weight, I'll only put 1 coat of clear on. And what happens is, well, it does make it lighter right up into the point where you have to glue the tissue back down after gas or oil gets into it. Keep in mind what this first coat of dope is doing too. It's fuel-proofing the wood, so that even if you scratch the paint or buff through, you're still going to have some fuel-proofing there. Not a good place to save. I always say, in my own case, that if you put 1 coat extra underneath the tissue, it's better than putting 1 coat not enough. And in the past, I've tried doing it in 3 and 4 coats with a little thicker. I think this one we're going to put 5 or 6 coats, but a little thinner. Save the sanding, get a little bit better adhesion, and I think we'll ultimately wind up with a better plane. And right now we're plenty far ahead on the construction part of the plane, so we can afford to live like a king here, so to speak, anyway. Anyway, there was a message on the machine when I got here this afternoon that Jimmy was coming over with his PM to repair it, put the tail in. I don't know if you know, Jimmy had crashed the PM, the white one that we built last year. And of course we use this glass table that I have here as an alignment tool. And maybe we'll get a couple minutes of that on tonight's session. Every year this time I just go into, I guess right about now is when we start to finish. The whole idea of this is this can be drying. All this dope and stuff can be drying out while we're making the body. So the sooner we can get some of this started, get this going, we can start laying out the body, making up the formers, making up the doublers, whatever. But if you make the body first and you're looking to get the wing and the body in a hurry, this can be a very frustrating thing because you want to rush the finish then. Doing it this way, I think you don't have the temptation you have to rush it. Okay, that's the second coat, and I'm guessing we're going to need at least 4 here. Now I make a real effort at even sealing a little hole where the horn goes. I want everything sealed in by the hinges. That's one spot that if you get a little pinhole and the oil can get in there, the thing starts to pick up. I've seen planes at the Nats where the oil got under the finish, under the Jap tissue with a clear finish, and you could look right in and see oil. So a little extra time getting the edges here is well worthwhile. It's these first couple of coats that are going to get this thing sealed. Now while this is drying up, I can be working on the wing. I have a little more sanding to do. I want to do, just make sure, I want to be absolutely positive that I don't have any little bumps or little things I don't want to see on that wing. I'll bring that wing over to the main bench, do a little final sanding. I can get a coat on that. And this is one of the hardest things to teach people, or help people with. I don't know, teaching them is not the right word. Is you should always have something from this point in the job now. We should always have something to sand, something to dry. While this is drying, I can be working on this. The reason for that is you don't run into a log jam. You don't run into a time where, I'll rush outside and sand this afternoon or something. We're going to try to flip-flop back and forth. While the wing is drying, I can be working on this. While this is drying, and so I can get in my morning sessions, I can get in my night sessions. I can get something done each time I come down to the shop. There'll be something to sand and work on, and something to put a coat of dope on until both of these items are in silver. That's a good concept. Work time management. Work that way. Now another, I don't know why, this seems to be, everybody seems impressed when they see this idea. I keep a jar of thinner. Now I'm going to sand the wing later, who knows when, an hour from now I'll be done, a couple hours anyway. What I want to do is I want to just keep the brush clean. A lot of people leave the brush out and it gets all thick and gooey and gummy and everything. If you have a brush with about 1 inch of thinner in it, then you can afford to change the thinner regularly. It'll preserve the brush life. I just wipe, get out all the stuff, and leave the lid half on like that. This will keep it nice and fresh till I'm ready to do that next, well, when I'm finished with that, the next doping on this, I'll be ready to go. Now, no matter how many times I sand this wing out, I'll always come back to it. And because you come back to it at a time where you're not brainwashed or whatever. I keep doing the old test, and right here I find a spot. I made up some brand new little sanding blocks with some nice 400 back paper. No matter how many, it seems like there's no end to the amount of times you could sand it out, as long as you don't get carried away and get everything paper thin. What I'm looking for is not to have a flaw in here that ultimately will become a mountaintop, and I want to thin this edge out a little bit. That's what I want, the flaps to blend right in here. So this will just be a little, this is the last, actually this will probably be the last thing I have to do before I can get some dope on the wing. Again, it's this time, I don't know why, it's this time of the year that the house starts to smell like dope. My wife starts to get annoyed every time she comes home from work. Ah, you burned dope in the house. Ah. And then she beats on me and, you know, poisons me, tries to poison me anyway. But it's this time of year that you realize, at least for us on the East Coast here, it's cold outside, the leaves are all blowing off the trees, and you start to really feel like a modeler again. And you know you're looking forward to 6, 7 months of real nice, comfortable modeling, pizza pie, coffee, whatever. So I don't know what to say. It just feels good today to be down here and have the work done and know I can put her around tonight. And with Jimmy, maybe somebody else will come over tonight. I will take my time off camera and final sand this out before I put any dope. I promise you, this wing will be perfect, Joe. What am I talking about? It's my wing. The hell with you, Joe. Now the last thing, I'm pulling out the gear blocks because I want a radius. I'm going to take the tip weight box out too. I want to re-radius all these edges. I block sanded this back down. And obviously I want to get dope inside here and fuel proof it and seal it and whatever. So what I can do is I can take the block now, assuming this one fits pretty good. The other one I'm going to put a little extra shim on. Get the final fit. Radius all the edges off before you put any dope on it at all. Now what I always like to do, these little boxes and little hatches, and I'll just do one on camera, is seal the whole thing, seal the whole edges with CA. And the reason for that is it gives it a nice hard edge. And just maintaining that radius, if it's soft wood with just dope, it's almost impossible to do it. This will give us a nice hard razor. Remember, we're looking for a lot of little special details in this model. We're not looking to just slap one of these, you know, the ironing board specials together, paint the leading edge red, and that's it. This is kind of a, I don't know, like a little French poodle of a model, a little fancy guy. Anyway, it's all hardened up on the edge now. When I go to do the dope, this one will be ready. Of course, this is what I like to do, is jig everything up on some kind of little fixture that I can just paint away, and that'll be it. Now, I always harden up all these edges because I've resanded this out. Keep a little thin coat of hot stuff on that edge, and keep the radius. Don't lose that little radius. So important. Now I always like to start on the bottom of the wing, let the bottom kind of dry up, then flip it over. And I always can put a hook in the ceiling to hang it up by the lead outs if I really want to get even more speed going. I'm just making sure that this first coat is getting some good penetration. Because this plane is going to either have some kind of radical camouflage paint job or something that, well, I sure wouldn't want to be pulling up the tape and redoing the paint and everything. Oh God, that only has to happen to you once, and you figure it out. All right, actually, that's the way this is working out. I'll get a coat of this on here. I expect Jimmy to get here momentarily, actually. I'll be working on Jimmy's plane now while this one is kind of kicking off, and maybe even get a second coat on this. But again, always try to arrange your work so you can kind of flip-flop back and forth between parts. You'd be amazed how much that adds to your efficiency. Just unbelievable. Now, one of the things for sure you want to do is get every cap strip, because we want to re-radius these edges. I want to get these cap strips good and soaked. I'm trying to put even a little bit extra on them, especially on a joint where the cap strip joins the sheeting. That's one of the spots that once the wood swells up a little bit and you block sand it down a couple of times, when you look down that wing and it's all finished, you'll have perfection. I want to get all the edges. Never skip any of the edges, that's for sure. All of this, once it's hardened up, then you can get a real nice edge on it. Now I'll let this dry on this side and I'll flip this over. I can do all the tip weight boxes and all that stuff while this is drying. Now I got all the little parts off there. One coat on while the old bottom of the wing is drying. I'm trying to make some speed here so that I'll have some time to work on Jimmy's plane this afternoon. Obviously a good time just to let everything dry up here. Okay, 2 coats drying on everything. Boy, it's a good feeling to get that much done. Jimmy's here with the PM, and we're going to try to do a obviously we need a tail. This took a we haven't decided whether we're going to try to make a new top block or salvage this one. That's still up for discussion, but we're going to start working on piecing the back of the plane together while we think about working on up in the front here.
Are you going to start?
Yeah, no, you push here right where my finger is. I was just trying, oh, there we, up, okay. Just get it tacked in position first. Once you get it tacked, then we can run the seam from the inside.
Okay.
Now, the whole idea of this is to use as little kicker as possible, but if this doesn't stick real well, we'll use it. Let's see if that held. No, you need some kicker. Okay, we got that tacked in position. You know what helps, Jim, is this is so capillary, this stuff. It wicks right in there. And if you can get away with the stuff kicking without the kicker, boy, do you come out ahead of the game.
Especially on the outsides, you have to sand the powder off.
Yeah, you don't have to sand anything off. Okay, you're just picking up a little bit of the paint. See if that kicks without kicker. Okay, you got that. Now I can run it inside the fuse. Oh, it went right in there. Perfect. Okay. That'll, where that wood is fractured too. Just let it, not tip the nose down, and it'll just run right down and lock the bell crank and full down.
Next week.
Next week.
Not laying where it was.
Okay. Yeah.
Something's not right there.
Pull this
maybe
out.
It's going to go in.
And we'll tack it first. Tack it first, and then I'll run the seam. You see what I'm doing? When he holds the nose down, I'm just tacking the outside, point the nose down, and let it run inside the fuselage. The glue is running right inside the fuselage. This will be just as strong as ever when it's done.
Now watch out.
Yeah.
That's another usable flap there we don't want to lose.
Alright, let's let that seal. Now we'll get this whole seam. Maybe you could put it up, yeah, down a little bit. And then we'll seam it from the inside. I'll run the glue down the inside.
Flap right now, we'll never get it together.
Yeah, well, I'm only going to tack just from here for. I'll leave the little back piece down. That stuff is so capillary, Jim. It goes right in there. And that dust from the towel just kicks it right off. Easier than doing tile work. All right, let's put a little bit here under this flap and just let it flap down. Now, don't put it with your hand. Your hand will stick to it right away.
Got enough tail weight here. I don't need any of me.
Okay, right in here, there's a broken former that we got to fix right in there. That's the next thing, is to get that pushed over into position and glue that in. That'll hold the side a little straighter too. And it may be that I can get this right from the, oh yes. Let's just tack it then. This will lock, let's hope it'll lock this into position. Yeah, let me get the seam out here. Okay, as long as it doesn't move now, we're in Fat City. With the paper towel. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
Just, okay. And now we'll jig the other side. Now we got to play with that other side and get it lined in. Yeah, it looks pretty solid now. I just want to show this too. Jimmy's got a couple more of the little pieces in and he kind of block sanded them in. This was all missing from here back. We have to make a plug here. Now what Jimmy's going to do is, because we're missing that piece, whenever you have a crash, step one is find all the parts. Whatever you do, don't forget to get all the parts, whether it's a fairing for a motorcycle or whatever. If you have all the parts, it's a lot easier. All right, we're going to cut this back with a little bit of a draft angle and make a plug that'll drop right in like a cork. Shave it off and sand it in, because this is going to hold the back of the body rigid while we get up and make a new tail mount. You just run a little seam of glue around there. Let's see if you can see I don't know if you can see the little draft angle going in. As soon as that kicks, we'll trim it off with the Zona saw and block sand it in and hit it with thin CA so that what we're trying to do is get the back of the body to be a stable platform so we can reset the new tail that's going to go in. Jimmy's got a tail already built. We can reset that tail right in. Now all you got to do, Jim, is just, when that's dry, Zona it off, block sand it in. Beautiful. Okay, Jim, you can just put a little CA on a rag and just zip-o-weenie that right in. Now that'll hold it while we flip it over and get the top ready. Okay, we got a little hole here from sanding this all down. Jimmy's going to fill in, just put a little plug. Let me get on a macro lens, Jim showed us. This is a great little trick. There's a little hole, little piece missing here. I don't know if you can see this sticking out. Just made a little wedge, like a little cork. All right, touch it with CA and block sand it off, baby. All you need to drop a CA, wipe it if you have to. And just block sand it off with any of the sanding blocks that we have here. Now what's nice is while we're working on this, everything's drying up over here like just beautiful. Of course, we're getting high from the smell of this junk, but now what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick up the center line where this, and this plane did fly pretty good. It was in good Olympic. Not many people can do that. That's Kazmanato can't even do that. Okay, we're going to put this back in, and I want to pick up a line on one fuselage side, because what we're going to do is actually lower the tail down into the body. That'll again kill some weight too. As long as we can pick up a center line here and a center line here, I can transpose down make a new center line and cut the fuse side. So now what I'm doing, because we know that this is the end here was in alignment, I'm going to measure down to the tape, measure down to the tape. Then I know this line is parallel to the thrust line, and I can either raise it or lower it just a little bit to put the new tail in. Okay, now we have the tape is parallel to where the thrust line is. I'm just going to raise this up by taking a piece of 1/8 inch tape, going over the top. Okay, now here's one of those areas. Remember that little tool I showed on a previous video? This is that Walt Russell. Lays on a table and it picks up a little center line. Now, I need to get the center line in the front here, which I can pick up relatively easily here. And then I need to shim the back of the body. I need to check this at several points and make sure I have the fuselage jigged up, and you can use IBM cards, books, magazines, toilet paper, anything. You just need to get it. In my case, I'm using videotapes. That's the center line on that side. Center there. And I'm low in the back. So what I need to do is just use an IBM card, shim this up. We'll just take a rough guess. Put too many of them in and we can take some out. IBM cards are a real good way of doing this. What this is doing is a couple more. Establishing this, that the wing is level to the table. We're using the table for our reference. And if you haven't made up one of those little Walt Russell gizmos, good investment, make one up. We need a couple cards now under the outboard wing. Again, nothing scientific. You can use pieces of paper. Okay, using the tool, you can see we're picking this up. Whenever we make the flap fillets, we make them on a center line, so that we're right on the center line right now on this side. You can see we're right on the center line of the wing up here. And of course we want to go to the other side. I'm gonna have to move the tape here, I think. Right on the center there, so that what we've done is all 4 of these points now are the same height off the table. And we can use IBM cards down here. You can just keep shimming it back up till all 4 of those are exactly the same. Then we're going to measure from the table up both parts on this tail. In fact, Jimmy's got to go. I'm going to do this off camera. Get this little piece here and then we'll be ready to install a stab. Get this perfectly parallel. In other words, we got the wing parallel to the table. Now we want to get this cut on here parallel to the table. Then we'll check everything out before we put the tail in. No, I just wanted to get a rough. We've just been fooling with this with IBM cards. Now it looks like we're real close. And we could actually dry fit the tail in here. Get an idea if it fits. Now, whichever side, obviously, if this is down like this or up like this, we want to maintain the parallel and just sand that one side up or down. Actually, I'm going to have to wait till Jimmy gets back to do this because I need his eyes up in the front of the model to work on it. So, in the meantime, this is going together reasonably well. Jimmy went off to the doctor to get a who knows what. I got the mail done, and I got a couple of things here that came in today's mail I figured I'd pass on to you. This is George Enott from Hermitage, PA, and this is a, believe it, 17 ounces. Enya 35, then he dropped it down to a Weber 20. Anyway, he sent these 2 pictures in. Absolutely beautiful little model. This is an old-time stunt model called the Dick Doc. And Jimmy, when he got to see this, he says, oh, I like it, I like it. Well, I like it too. Hey. Thanks a lot, George. Appreciate it. I'm just reading his note here to see if there's anything else. 17 ounces. Beautiful. Now, you know Jimmy loves GVs. Well, Pat Johnson does too. I'm going to send this book on to Pat Johnson. He's doing the plans for Strega and Tsunami. And you know, this is the one that George built the model of, or is in the process of building the model of. We had these big wheel pants on video already. Just one more cool part of our hobby that we can share some of this stuff. And Pat, I hope you're doing a slam dunk job on those plans. He has really been a good, sent me some little mock-ups and stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing them in full size here. Hey, this magazine has a lot of GB models in it. Pretty cool magazine here. Now, you know, Mike Haravich works for Xerox, and Mike, of course, has been my friend for a long time here with his, what we affectionately call the flying van. Anyway, the Xerox laser. Mike Haravich's personal model. And of course, if you can see in my executive offices, this great oil painting that George Venturini did, he only made one mistake on it. You can't land a tail skid plane on concrete. This is why I have the picture. I pointed out the flaw in the picture to him and he gave me the picture. Thanks. Thanks, George. You're all right. I don't care what Damarel says about you. Anyway, as soon as Jimmy gets back, we're going to get back to working on this. Try to get this caught up tonight. Now, while I'm waiting for Jimmy to get back, I want to put this on the video. Is this awesome? Look, I got this in the mail today. Spitfire project. This, of course, is Joe Adamusco's address. Look at this. And, of course, he goes in to tell me, yeah, Wendy, you think you're a cute guy, but you're really a horse's ass, and, you know, whatever. Anyway, what he did do, look how he signs it, Spitfire 1 over and out. He made up, and, of course, anybody wants some of these, just holler, and I'll send them out to you. It is a very accurate Spitfire outline, similar to what Steve Busso, let's give Busso the credit for whatever. This was his original idea. He redrew the tail to show the change in area and curve that we had. And of course we have a book of them, so we're basically, we got invasion striped ones and no invasion striped ones. And I'm just looking this over and I'm thinking, ooh la la, Midgley, eat your heart out. We will have I think Jimmy died at the doctor here. It's been about 4 hours since he's been back. Jimmy! What happened, Jimmy? I was hurt.
Speaking of great thrills.
Speaking of great thrills, all the alignments we did here, everything looks good except for one thing. We need to move the whole stab just a little bit further forward. So with Jimmy's great assistance, and if he lets this damn thing go, we're in big trouble because it's going to walk across the room. Finally got it all jigged up.
One thing I'm good for is dead weight.
Dead weight. Now let's dry fit that. Just dry fit that and let's see. I got the controls locked in neutral, so all you really have to do now, if you can get the horn in neutral, and there should be just a little bit of slop in the horn.
Could use a little more. But for
more?
alignment, this is, yeah, there's next to no slop in the horn.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
What Jimmy's doing is doing a dry fit on a tail. Put the IBM cards in the hinge line.
You don't have to have your eyes in two places at once. That's why you can bank.
You can just
you got something to bank on.
Bump that up and check that you have the same distance on one side of the stab. Go out to the other side. Of course, he's already got cards in there. Check that the tail moment arm is the same on both sides, and you can do the fine tuning. Now what we're going to do is mix up some 5-minute. We have everything we hope That word hope is always here. And good, soldered on a washer. And want to get some 5-minute epoxy in there, and then we'll have 5 minutes to babysit and get this so we don't have it off this way, or not parallel to the table, not parallel to the wing. So we'll have a little bit of work time there. All right, let's mix up some 5 minutes, Jim.
Jim, just measure it again. I think you moved.
Okay, mush you guys. It's already got the epoxy on there. Now before you even mush it, let me just make sure we don't have a drool coming out the bun. That's okay. It's not too bad. This way you'll get a good seam coming out the bun. In fact, this is a real nice seam. Okay, that's clean. Just get the tail straight this way. Let's see what it looks like this way. If anything, your side is high. Not by much. You could move the glue tube over if you want to. It's not off by much. Make sure that, okay. Is that close, Jim?
Close, not quite.
Okay. All right, we got time to work with that epoxy, so it's not a big rush.
There's like directions right there. It says press start.
All right, we need an answer. How many pizzas does it take to line up the tail on Jimmy's plane?
We'll find out when it's done.
Oh my God. So Jimmy's plane sitting here patiently waiting to have the rest of the body put back on it.
Well, I have to keep going because.
No, I missed the hole in the front here. We're going to do a little bit more.
Alright, I'll look for stuff.
Now we're just doing the same thing up here for making a little plug for the piece. See, if you had that piece, it might be a lot easier, but without that piece, you got to struggle.
Well, I think that's where the rock was.
Okay.
It started this whole thing. Everything else was in one piece. That's where the rock hit.
All right, anyway you got a little hole, just plug them up with forks. You got one here, and then we could start sanding that down a little bit. And we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna sneak up where the women are.
Flowers on it, and are bathed in glow.
Look at this, man.
I think it's doable. Get out of here with the camera, Fresh. Go away.
Wendy, go away. Now look, if anybody, Joe, if she ever says that I make a mess in arts, let me see what you're making, honey.
Wendy. We're making album covers. When? This is my part.
Yours is clean and hers is
She
dirty.
cleaned up already. No, I did not.
By the way, this is the woman that owns that chair that I fixed. As soon as she sits down, it's going to break and it's going to grab her ass like a clam.
Oh, God.
Look at this mess.
Look at this mess.
Oh, I don't believe this mess.
But look at the great Christmas gifts.
Yeah, let me see what you're doing. Mrs. DeJulia is dying to see what you're doing here. What are you doing? All these women at work that sitting through these boring videos.
Well, these are half finished.
Look at what my wife is
They
making.
have to be decorated.
They're making albums up here. These are presents. We're making our Christmas
Look how
presents.
pretty.
Aren't we nice people? You would think
Look
we're
at
kind
this one. This is the nicest.
Oh, yeah.
Now you have to see the ones that Joe did.
Yeah, you guys are okay.
She did real Christmas fabric.
Jimmy's down there grinding away at that poor,
This is my first
the wreck of the
try.
Titanic,
Look
and
at
we're
this
up
one.
here
This
playing
one.
with this.
This one's beautiful. Look at this one.
All right. All right.
And a little one to match.
That one's for Mrs. Vanyas.
Yeah.
Okay, Mrs. Shamp. Now let's see. Tammy, that one's for Tammy. Look at this. You guys
Nice,
are getting
huh?
video albums. Unbelievable. I love the mess stuff. I feel like oh God.
Hey, you know what? It doesn't look bad.
The ghetto craft class up
I have
here.
to iron though.
That's it. I'm out of here. I'm going back to play with Jimmy. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Now, wouldn't you like to live in a house where when you walk down the stairs, you run into the Red Baron? Boom, you look off to the left. Aeroplanes, floor to ceiling aero. Look at this. Hard to believe. How you coming, Jim?
Getting nowhere.
Batman.
The year-old paint is still chewing gum.
Yeah, that's that thinner.
I mean, it won't even
Oh
sand.
my God.
Look at
Just
that.
tear it all off and go back down
That's
the road.
100 grit, and it's chewing gum on the 100 grit.
Yeah. Now, earlier on in the day, and Jimmy wasn't even here, I was talking about seal and things. I don't know if you can See this on the macro lens here. This nose ring had at some place wasn't sealed, and it's now an oil, looked like an oil spongy, whatever you want to call it, and some of the oil has gotten back up here into the fuselage itself. That oil just wicks into everything when you don't have a sealed surface. So it looks like what Jimmy's going to do is just sit here and peel the paint right off, peel it right down to bare wood. Looks like the easiest thing.
Yeah. And glass it back up.
Glass the nose, and then just treat it like it's a new plane. I just want to thank Dave Midgley for sending in. This is a very expensive steel. I don't know what company makes this, but it's a real hard steel ruler. And if you get one of these, obviously you could call Dave and find out where he got it. I'm sure he got a good source for these. It has a real razor edge for trimming and truing surfaces. It's absolutely, I don't know if you can see that, it is absolutely true. The only problem is it doesn't have a hole in one end that you can hang it up, and because it's hard steel, it's like trying to drill a hole in a hammer. So what I did, I took some Velcro tape here, so obviously I won't use that side, and I just put some Velcro up on the wall. It sticks real nice. Yeah, check this out. Midgley, you're okay. I don't care what Rick Campbell says about you. That's beautiful. Now what I did off camera, I'm going to do it again on this. I took an elevator and just went to see how this was drying up. Did a little test. The elevators are still need another day to dry. Well, these aren't too bad. What happens though if you try to do a little test to see if this is ready to sand and you see chewing gum? Actually, this is pretty good. It's only the elevators that didn't dry up so good. So anyway, tomorrow morning, I'll let that dry another night. Tomorrow morning I'm going to try to get in the shop here and get everything sanded down and get ready to start tissuing this up. Really excited about this. This really looks nice. It's coming out nice, except for the elevators not being dry. But that's what happens is, this part probably got done just a little bit thinner. The other one got done a little thicker. It won't hurt to let it dry an extra day. It never hurts to let dope dry an extra day, believe me. Cheap insurance. So rather than push this, I'm going to let this dry another day and we'll work on it next time. Okay, now as you probably remember, yesterday was one of those days. I tried to sand out some of the clear, thinking I could get a little bit of a jump on it. Well, you know, you never really can get a jump on it. It always comes back to bite you. I put this aside to dry, and one of the things I do here, I put the stuff aside to dry by a heating vent, especially now. I put this dope that's on here now with so much amount of thinner that it took an extra day or two to dry, but that was no problem at all. Now one of the things I want to do right away, I get me a little test, get any piece, it doesn't matter which one. You know, this feels like, you probably even can hear it, it feels like a little bit on the rough side. Well, the way to know that if the dope is ready to be sanded, there's a very simple test. It will not pick up as little balls of chewing gum on a sandpaper. If you see that, you ought to let it dry longer, especially by a heating vent. The reason for that is what's going to happen is this goes down into the wood, and if it traps thinner under there, you have a little ball, I guess is the right word, where the paint really isn't hard. And as you scrape through the surface, you're picking up that loose paint and turning it into like a little baby golf ball. So when you see the dope powdering off, and I'll show this on the macro lens, because this is really perfect right now. It'll powder off like powder. When it powders off, you know you did your homework. You did the job right, and it's going to be very easy and practical to sand. See, this house has air heat, forced air heat. If you go down and look, you see I have, right under here is where I put my parts. I have some parts over there by the foam wings drying. You don't want to have it right up by the heating vent or it's going to dry too fast. When it dries too fast, what it does, it traps thinner underneath it. You want it to gas off and dry out slowly. That's the whole trick. The whole trick to getting these nice, light, beautifully buffed out finishes, there's a trick. The trick is you let the paint dry between coats. It makes sanding so much easier. Let me go over to this part and just focus in. If you look, I just did this on camera about 10 seconds ago. You can see powder. Well, when you see nice powder coming off, by the way, this is 320. I'm knocking this down with, this piece doesn't even have a number on it. It's 320. Take my word for it. Never take my word for it. The whole idea here is to get this, if you can even hear this, you can hear it's rough. Where I sanded it, it's smooth. Rough, smooth. You can hear it. You could feel this. You could almost do this in the dark. But it's getting this surface ready. This surface has already been, the wood cells have been swelled. It's been locked into position. Now I'm really just shaving off a little bit of the mountaintops and the extra dope that's on here. And I'll probably wind up maybe even putting one extra coat on the whole thing. I'll see you at the end of this. President Nixon. I'm President Nixon. I'm going to talk to Wendy. Look at this phone. Back to reality. President Nixon lives, believe me. I'm going to try to use on some of this, now that I know that the dope is plenty dry, I'm going to try to use 320 paper on a block. Now, I don't glue the paper to the block, because what's going to happen after I sand from it, I want to move the block a little bit. So I'm constantly changing the edge. Sandpaper usually catches both of the edges. So when you make a little block like this, when these are all small parts, I need to radius all the edges off, and then I'm just constantly going to be moving this, maybe every minute or so, off. If it's going to get to the end of the paper and get clumsy to use, and then just throw it away. But what I need to do is get this all knocked down to where you can hear it. That's rough. Get it knocked down and then evaluate it. Look up to the light, and I'll try to do this on camera later. And see if I want to have just a little bit of gloss on the wood. I don't want the wood to be bare wood. If I sand this too much, I'm going to go right down into bare wood and then have to start this all over again. So I'd like to get that done. And I'll do all the little, the old trick, the oldest trick in the book, always do all the little parts first in case you see you're having a problem, well, or you need your technique developed a little better. You get all the little parts done. I'll do all the little parts. In fact, I don't have a lot of time today. I'm probably going to get all the little parts done, and then I'll do the wing in a separate session. But right now, getting all this stuff knocked down is a tremendous importance, because this is like building the foundation of the house, and then we want to get on to laying the layers of bricks, the layers of finish. And if the layers are all going in flat, they'll sand right out. If they go in like this, you're going to be constantly hitting mountaintops and every other crazy thing. I also, before I put the wing away with the last coat of clear, I had a couple little nicks and dings. I stuck a little dap in, so I can go and blend those in right now or when I get to doing the wing. Important to understand, and it's always hard, the hardest thing to convince people of is that sanding early on like this is going to save you time and energy and money and make you younger, and your hair won't fall out and everything. And it's hard to do that. Everybody wants to take the raw wood thing and run right out and silk span it. And then, man, you're going through edges of silk span, you're going through mountaintops. If you picture in your mind a perfectly flat surface, get that first layer of tissue on perfectly flat, you'll almost never sand through it later on. So I'll do the rest of this off camera. I'm going to spend the rest of whatever time I have, try to get as much of this sanded out. And I probably will not get that finished in this session, but I'll come back the next time. I want all this stuff sanded down, because I'm trying not to go too far ahead. I want to do one step at a time here so this all makes sense later on. Now, one of the things that's real handy, the old, hinge slotting tool, since we cut these grooves, it's a perfect fit, and it really makes the corners nice and even. And that last one I have to get by hand. Now I'm radiusing carefully all these little edges. Everywhere there's a little edge, I want to have a radius. Because boy, if you tissue up to a razor edge, the tissue will break right away. Anything that's sharp, except for those hinges, where the hinge pockets are, I like to keep that nice and sharp if I can. Now after doing all the sanding on the little parts here, I have everything except the wing done. I've been checking this to see, and I'm going to see if I can do this up on a macro lens. Obviously the two things I don't want to do is sand all the paint off, all the dope, or I'm back down to raw wood. And I don't want to leave so much of it on here that I have mountaintops that the silk span's going to go over. And I think I've got a good compromise here. Let me put this on a macro lens. Well, not too clumsy. And just see if you can see how much paint actually is. Just a little bit of a shine on there. Let's see it. Just the slightest little bit of shine, and everything is dusty. Everything has that little white dust. And I think except for the main frame of the wing itself, which I'm going to get to do at another session, I guess, or tonight, because I'm just about had it now. What I'm going to try to do is tissue this next, get this ready for tissue. Well, I'll get the wing. I'm trying to make a decision here. It's very difficult. My tenants called, of course, this morning and told me that in the last storm we had, the roof is leaking now by the two-family house, so my mind is like jello here trying to figure this out. But that's what it should look like before we get ready to do the tissue, right? Just about like that. And what I do with all these curved surfaces, everything that's got a curve, of course, it's difficult to use a sanding block. I like to just dress everything off, and this will be the final thing on these parts before I tissue them. Just any of the low spots now that are sitting there that haven't been hit with the sanding block, this will take that material and just give it a little scuff so the tissue will tend to sit better. And that little space where we have the double fiberglass, a lot of times you just want to go over that by hand too to scuff it up. Now even at this stage here, I can see there's a couple little flaws in here, and I'm just putting the least little bit of DAP on them. I like to do this on an ongoing basis. Don't even have to sand that before we go ahead. And of course the final inspection by hand. No rough spots. See, now this is just, I'm going back over these little areas that I touched up with DAP. What the hell was the other one? A couple little spots here. Let's see if I can do this on a macro. What I'm going to do the rest of this wing off camera. We're about at the end of the night here. End of the night. I am lost, man. This is just one day after another of work, work, work. Anyway, I'm going to finish this guy out, and the next session we have, we're going to do some tissue, definitely. This is ready for tissue. Alright, now I'm finally going to get the silk span this parts today. Number one step, any kind of operation with silk span, get the table immaculately clean, or get a clean sheet or blanket or whatever. The reason for that is really, really simple. What happens, you pick up a little piece of dust or dirt when you lay the tissue here and you wet it down, you pick it up, that little thing stays under the tissue, and you have a little mountain that ultimately results in something that's a pain in the ass to fix later on. In fact, I'll run this scraper. I got a little bit of CA over here. If you start with a perfectly clean table, it's going to save you a lot of work somewhere down the road. I used to think this was a bunch of nonsense. All this cleaning really doesn't count. And right in the middle of a foam wing, you get a little dot, and then the tape, the tissue rips, and then something else happens, and then you fill it, but the filler doesn't stick to. Oh, okay. Clean table. Let's get a part to test. Now this is the material I'm using, the medium silk span, S-T-O-O-2-GM. It's really, at least I've found, it's not a good idea to try to use double O. Double O somewhere down the road bites you. You either wind up on a cap strip or somewhere where it just doesn't fill or cover the way you want it to, and it makes you crazy. I've had a lot better luck using medium, getting a little bit of extra filler and dope on it, and then it gives me a better base that I can sand out. I'm not always vulnerable around the edges and stuff. And the testing that I've done shows me it doesn't weigh. If it does weigh more, it weighs an amount that's less than a gram on a whole wing. So it really isn't the kind of thing I'm all nervous about. You think it's going to be heavier, but when you're done sanding it all down, it really isn't a lot more. Now I'm just going to try to make this, pretend this was under a microscope, and here's your wood. And I think what really happens is, let's just say you use the thin tissue, and if there's an imperfection in here, what happens, by the time you cover the tissue, you sand through this imperfection and you have a gouge in here. When you use the heavier tissue, I think it covers better, and when you sand back down, you still have some silk span underneath there. You don't wind up, somewhere down the road, you wind up with a surface that's easier to deal with. And I think that extra weight, when you're ultimately done sanding everything, you're down to the thickness that the tissue normally would be anyway. I'm not really sure exactly how that works, but I know I've done tests on elevators. I've done 2 exact elevators, just to make an example. Did one with 00 and one with medium. And when I put the medium on, yeah, it weighed less than a gram that I could weigh, maybe 3/4 of a gram more. And I said, ooh, that's a lot heavier. And as I kept sanding the silver coats down and bringing it back to the way I was happy with it, with all the sanding, I wound up sanding off whatever was extra, and I had them back down to where they were both the same. So I really think that the medium gives you a little bit of advantage. It's easier to work with. You just save yourself a little bit of aggravation right in the beginning. And the biggest thing, if you have an open bay wing and you do 00 and you sand through the edge of the cap strip, well, usually right around these edges is where it gets, and the finish will almost be finished. You're ready for silver, and you'll see a little razor cut. You're very vulnerable. If you use medium, you don't run into that problem. And it may be that some people would rather use the medium on open bays and use the 00 on the tails. I've just found, for me, medium the whole thing. Strago was all medium, and the finish was 7 ounces. I don't see any way that, just make it easy on yourself. The better of the 2 choices. Now, if you've ever watched any of my other videos, almost every one that I've tissued, I use the Windex method. That's, I guess, a standard method anyway. It's the one I've used all along. I cut a piece of tissue. I always do the little parts first. Again, these are all little basic things that'll help you get a really nice tissue job. Cut the tissue a little bit bigger than you need it. Get a little bit of Windex. Spray the Windex right on. Light, you don't need a lot. Blot it out. Now it's just damp. It's not wet. It's not dripping or anything. It's just damp. Take the part, and in this case we're going to run the tip weight box cover. Always a small part first. The idea of doing a small part is if your dope is too thick, too thin, or you're having a little trouble getting acclimated to using whatever material, or if you haven't built a plane, like a lot of people don't build a plane until the winter time, so all summer their skills are getting rusty. I like to just lay the part right out, just damp. Press it out with my bare hands. Put a little bit of dope on the part. Use my bare hands to press it down. It seems like the most reasonable way to do this is just with your bare hands. Now what I'll do, I'll put this piece aside and work on some other piece. Once this dries, I'll get a brand new razor. In this case, I don't have one. I have to make one up. I take a double-edged razor, put some tape on one side, and that's so I don't pick it up by the wrong side. What I find is you can just, this is the best thing for trimming silk span. The edges, a double-edged, I don't know why. These are much sharper than X-Acto blades. When they get where they won't cut, wipe the blade this way with some thinner on a paper towel. The reason they don't cut is it builds up a little bit of dope along the edge. So once that's dry, we'll trim that off, and that should be one piece in the bank. And we'll just go right down all the little pieces first. Now today is an extremely cold day outside. I'll bet you it's 30 degrees out there. So what's an advantage for me? Because what I try to do, and this may be a philosophy you can use, as soon as my wife leaves for work in the morning, I like to do as much of the doping as possible. Now what I do, and this really works well, this works better than you think it does. I turn the thermostat up to 90. Get the house as hot as you can possibly stand it. I let her leave first. As soon as she's gone, I turn it to 90. The house gets hot in 15 minutes. Then I shut the heat off. While I'm doing all the doping, I shut all the doors to the cellar, so most of the stink, let's call it stink, stays in the cellar. If the furnace doesn't kick on, it doesn't spread it through the house. Then I get my ass out of here, open up the doors and the windows in the cellar, let the cellar air out. Now the cellar gets ice cold and gets nice fresh air in it. Then when that's done, I turn the heat back on. Obviously, I don't want to spread this smell through the house. It's not a good idea to breathe too much of this either. So today, being so cold, I'm going to try to leave the parts in the furnace room there and open the door to the furnace room so that the smell doesn't come through the whole house. Anyway, I know that's a big problem. I know wives, these lovely wives we all have, and boy, they put up with a lot. Let's get realistic here. Any woman that has a modeler for a man, husband, boyfriend, lover, whatever, you got to put up with a lot of BS. So treat them to some nice fresh air. And I try never to do any of the doping and finishing on the weekends. I try to do it all during the week, or early in the morning, or at some time, or what'll happen if I need to do it and my wife is home, what I try to do is go out in the garage or something and do this, because she really is allergic to the smell. And I've heard from other women that tolerate this nonsense, like, can't they make dope that doesn't stink? Well, not only does it stink, it gives you a headache if you use too much of it too. So keep in mind, the best of all worlds, and that is a good tip, and it does work. So I don't want to hear any of the women out there in the real world say, oh, that Wendy's not sensitive to the female needs of the world. This Wendy is a woman's advocate. Ask my wife. There's nothing that'll make your life a living hell quicker than an unhappy wife, girlfriend, lover. And actually, in my case, Karen's been so good, it's just common sense that I would want to go out of my way to try to make her life as reasonable as possible, being I do all this stuff in the house. Anyway, from this point on, up to the wing, this is just redundant. You can always wipe barehanded. You can wipe with a towel. Now, when I get to the hinge pockets, what I'm going to do, I want to slit each hinge pocket. I don't know if maybe I can show this on the close-up here. Now what happens, once these double-edged blades get, I don't know how many, this of course has been used 100 times before. What you can do is take the tape off one side and just put it on the other side, and of course that's what I'm doing right here. So I'll get double the use out of the blade. Or you can be a big spender like Midgley and just throw the blades away. Okay, I start at the hinge pocket, work my way out. This seems to be the easiest way to do this. Let me show this a little closer. You know, now doing nice tissue work, there's a couple little tricks involved. I'm just slitting this off. This is one way of doing it, because I want to get those little flaps of silk span to go over the hinge pockets. I think there's one area that pretty much everybody I know could do a little improving on, and that's the tissue work. Now with the deal is now, once you pick this up, you want to dope in these hinge pockets and then pick that piece up. Get some fresh dope in there. This way it also fuel proofs a little bit of the wood. You can go right down the list here. This is really a good technique. Again, I'm trying to keep those corners and edges nice and sharp on the hinge pockets. Now I can pretty much just go by. And what happens as the tissue starts to dry up, you notice the tissue's getting all curly on one end. And because I'm doing this on camera, I'm going a little slower than I normally would. The flap is actually bowing. And what I'm going to do, as soon as I get one side of this done, I'm going to run right over and do the other side. It would be a big help if you could do both sides at the same time or as close to the same time as possible. And that's from one side being wet and one side being dry. Now, just go right down this end and just all of these pieces I can get off too. And I have the hinge pockets right in position. And of course the rest of the tissue I just work right around the edge. You can always leave a little bit extra on and wait till the dope dries and then sand the edges. That's always an alternative way of doing it. I like to try to get the razor in there and get it off as soon as possible. And then what I want to do right as soon as possible is flip this surface over, dope the other side so that I don't build a warp in. The whole idea is to do one side. As soon as you're done, this one's going a little slower than normal because I'm fooling around with the camera, but as soon as you get one side done, and it isn't going to stick to the table, as soon as you reach that point, flip it right over. Now you can see what happens. You've got a bow in this. Let's see, maybe you can do it this way. You see how that bows? Well, as soon as you dope this surface, it'll release that tension. So you're not getting one side drying and then the other side. You'd like to do them both as close to the time frame as possible. Now just before I flip it over, I want to just blot this down. The reason for that is I don't want it to stick to the table. So if I just press down, try to press that dope down through the tissue into the dope that's underneath. That'll make it that it won't stick to the table a little bit. By the way, another tip for people that are still at the basic learning stage, never use shrink dope anywhere except open bays. No place, if you go putting shrink dope on a flap, you may as well throw the plane away. Shrink dope only should go on open bays and only in very limited quantities. And I just spoke to somebody yesterday, I remember going through the whole dissertation. Don't even think about it. It's an accident waiting to happen. Again, the idea is to get both, if you could. Same thing with a wing, by the way, with any surfaces. You'd like to get one side doped, and as soon as possible, get the other side doped. And if you pick that, if you dope one side and put it aside to dry, almost guaranteed you have a warped wing, or you will have. Very, very important to pick that concept up. And maybe even if that's the only thing you get it. Actually, if you only get one good tip off every tape, you've paid for the price of the tape, you've learned more, and you'll probably be in a position that you can pass that information on to other people, like Dave Midgley does and like some of the other people that have benefited from all this knowledge. And this knowledge originally came from people like Harold Price and John DeTavio, the old-timers that were willing to share it, passed it on to me, and now I'm in a good position, thanks to the world of video, that I can pass it on to you, and it's your obligation to pass it on to other people. Otherwise, we're going to have Zippolini for an event. Now, you might say I'm conceited. I'm trying to work relatively quickly here. Now, see, this side of the hinge pockets I don't have to worry about. I already have tissue on the hinge pockets. So I can just trim this right off, pull all the wrinkles out. If this doesn't, this is something that people find objectionable, is rubbing the dope down by bare hand. I don't know why. If it does, use a paper towel. I guess a paper towel would be just as good. Anyway, that whole idea of doing both sides at once is so important. If you do an I-beam wing, I remember Billy Werwich telling me one of the really good tricks, and Mike Dietrich too had gone over and over, is dope one side and flip it right over and dope the other side. And then go back and dope the first side again. So both sides are wet and both sides are dry at the same time. Try to picture in your mind what's happening. Both sides wet, both sides dry. Okay, I'll just trim this off camera. Now it's so important with all the rushing going on. Now with both sides damp, both sides of this flap are damp now. I'm going back and putting on an additional coat of dope on both sides equally. That softens everything up at the same time. And I'll put this to dry. Never put the thing away to dry with just one side painted. Now you can see this. Let's see if I can show this on that. Let's see what we got here. I don't know if you can see, this is relatively straight now. I'm going to put this aside to dry, but never put it aside to dry with just one side doped. In fact, all these little areas you can press down bare-handed here. And once this dries up, then of course we'll dress off the edges of the tissue. And you can see outside here, I have the parts drying right by the door. And as I finish the parts, I'll put them all here, and then I have a little hook somewhere up here. I have a hook where I can hang the wing from, so everything will be in this confined room while it's drying. Believe me, it's not a great idea by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, to be breathing too much of this stuff in. Alright, so ready. I'm just going to do some of these other parts are kind of redundant, do as many of them off camera as I can. If I come into anything that looks like it's worth putting on a tape, I'll do it. Now the only part of this that's been a pain in the neck has been getting the leading edge, because it's curved, to go right around. So I've been putting an extra coat of dope on that as it goes around and making sure the hinge lines are stuck down. Well, it's a good feeling to have all this tissue drying out here, and you can see it's, of course, it's just a typical autumn Jersey day here. This has worked out well. It's kept a lot of the stink out of the house, and we'll probably be doing this more and more as the season goes on. One of the things I'm going to have to do, I'm not going to be able to do the wing right now. I want to run up and pick up some tubes. I'm out of tubes for my plans, and we're doing a lot of plan work lately. Now my friend Ruben McBride's been getting me these tubes to ship the plans in. Of course they're real handy, but you'll notice underneath here I have a nice piece of glass and a door that matches the door and glass. John DeTavio is going to give that to George, and we're going to go install that over in his shop later today. But I want to see if there's enough time left in this. Hard to believe the wind is howling and it's really it's cold out here. I'm going to try to get that wing tissued up while I have a little more time. This is the whole deal, though. This time of year, you just never know what you can get accomplished. Now what I tried to do here, I tried to do this off camera because I was going to experiment a little bit. This wing has a reflex airfoil in it out at the tip, and I had spoken to Joe about it, and he said it was no trouble getting the tissue to stick. I wound up putting a couple of razor slits in it, and what I wanted to do, I experimented by running this side first and flipping this over, and I figured if I had a better way of doing it, and I can't seem to figure a better way of doing it, that I would put it on a tape. It looks like this is just a typical whatever you want to call it, a typical tissue job. Anyway, one of the things that I have to be careful of here, of course, is I want to keep the tissue in that reflex thing from popping up, so I'm just re-doping it down before I go on to the other wing. Again, this is an unusual shape for a wing. I'd say probably, other than a T-bird or a smoothie or whatever, you wouldn't have this amount of complex curves. But anyway, I want to get this done for another reason, and this is a significant thing, is my wife just told me about an hour ago that tomorrow is an antiquing day. We're going antiquing, so she had the day off, and I thought maybe I'd get some work done on this, and I know Joe has his wing already tissued and everything. So what's going to happen here is, if I can get this done tonight, the advantage is it can be drying tomorrow, and it's a very significant thing to allow dope to dry in between coats. So I'd like to get everything, at least all the parts have 1 or maybe even 2 coats of dope, depending on how this dries up. And then what I'll do is, tomorrow morning I'll try to get up before she even gets up, sneak downstairs, put some dope on this stuff, and get it out in the garage drying all day, so while we're out antiquing, this stuff can be drying. Most important thing, get the hinge lines, the edges wrapped down nice and tight. And just press that sucker right down. And this is the area right here where I'm going to just keep monitoring it to see if I do have a problem with it coming up. I'll have to see what Joe did to get around it. Now notice the other thing, I tissued the first half of this out to here. The second half is going to come over here, so that in the middle there'll actually be double tissue out about 1 inch from the body on each side. Now remember, I had this little ding that I had to fill in with DAP. Well, I almost forgot about it. I'm getting ready to dope this side. That's why I like to keep doing these in an ongoing way. DAP is another thing. If you let it dry overnight, of course, it's always better than if you sand it right away. Reason is, you get the shrinkage out of the program early on. Now when I'm doing this kind of an operation, I always want the tissue plenty oversized. I don't want to fool around with this. Now you obviously, one of the choices you have is you could try to do this dry. I'm a lot more comfortable working with this material wet. I think it stretches it a lot easier. It gives you a little more working time. I like Windex better than water. Water seems to penetrate the wood a lot more. The Windex seems to evaporate a little quicker. But again, you could go with either one. I one time, like a fool, tried ammonia, straight ammonia, thinking that would be great. Of course, you can't breathe. You need an oxygen mask. Anyway, get one sheet laid out. Get ready. Now, remember the deal is here, just like doing the tails. You want to get one side doped, and you want to get right over and flip it over and do the other side before it warps, twists, pretzelizes. Anything bad can happen. So you just need to go a little, I guess, get your ass in gear special here. Looking forward to seeing George either later today or tomorrow, whenever. I have that glass out for in the truck for him. And one of the things that we've been trying to do some improvements on his shop, and we did pretty much a windy kind of a thing, get his stuff all in drawers and organized, and try to get him set up a little better. Trouble with George is he's so creative and artistic that he forgets a lot of times that the nuts and bolts part of it. He's dreaming about painting fire engines and going to art class constantly. Now, there's really no simple way that I know of other than just keep picking it up and stretching it. Get that razor. That's what's nice about having the ammonia in there. It gives you a little working time. You can work your way down the wing like this. You can pick it up a few times. Another reason why it's important to have all that dope underneath, you don't want to cheat yourself on the dope underneath, Or right now you'd be having trouble getting this to stick. That would be another problem. But it's real old-fashioned modeling. It's not like foam wings and, you know, acrylic finishes. This is dope and tissue. This is old-fashioned modeling, just like in the good old days when men were men and women had beards and everything. Now, when I get this first coat of dope on here, what I try to do is get it on, again, as quick as possible. Press it down with the bare hand. And out at this tip, I'm going to put some slits out here. And you can just keep picking it up and pulling the wrinkles out. Pulling forward at the leading edge just like you're making a pizza pie. Hey, pizza pie, speaking of that. Now you can see down at this tip, easiest way, soak it with dope. Don't fool around. The more dope you can get on there, it gives you better working time. Get it moving around a little bit. And now you just make a sunburst. Start from the middle and pull the wrinkles out, little by little by little by little. Work your way in one direction. Remember old Nobler wingtips with all those little ribs? Those old 57 Nobler wings? Used to do this, and I used to have the nicest wingtips of anybody in my crowd. Because I used to fuddle around with the tips and get all the wrinkles out. I was such a perfectionist when I was a boy. Okay. Now what we want to do here, I want to put a, this is going to want to pick up, so I want to slit. Come on, get off here. Just put some slits in the tissue and press it back down. And we'll see how this stays. Now I hear all these stories constantly about this carbon mat and this material and that material, how strong they are and everything. Well, I'll tell you, dope and tissue is pretty strong too. It's hard to imagine anything on the model that adds more strength for the amount of weight that it adds than tissue. Now this center section, because it's double tissued, believe me, when this is all dried out and all the dope is shrinking out, you get a tremendous amount of strength just from the fact that it's double tissued. And of course then I like to get, as soon as possible, get all this excess trimmed off. And I want to flip this puppy over and get the bottom done as soon as possible too. So I'm working at a little bit faster pace than I really would like to, but because I want to get the bottom done, I don't want one side shrinking out. And then I'll bring it right back over and dope everything both sides as quick as possible. Keep them wet. Whoa. Trying to use these Midgley scalpel blades to see if they're better than razors. Well, they're good, but I think the razor is still a little better. Of course, as soon as you trim it off, get right down there, get some dope on there, press it right down. Now before this dries, I want to flap this back, get the trailing edge done. Yeah, you think about how much strength the tissue, when that dope is all out in the sun and under tension, a lot of strength from a very little amount of weight. This is the old traditional way of building model planes. And it is kind of fun. It's like Lionel trains. Speaking of that, I'm going to be starting my village soon. I just can't wait. I'm supposed to go over, actually, one night this week, go over to a friend's house and help him with his village. Joe Carabello's the guy's name. And he's the one that loaned me all the Lionel trains last year to put on display up in my room up there. So if we happen to go to his house one day this week, I'll get a minute or two of video on it. So I know the women out there love those villages. They just can't live without it. And if you got a picture of your village under the tree, send it to me. Hey. Women love those villages. I love them. What am I talking about? Now you can see where the double tissue ends. It really does add a lot of strength. It's amazing. And this will be the last surface to do so. Just get this moving right along, similar to the other one. Again, it'll be a good feeling to know that all day tomorrow while we're puttering around, this will be drying, and boy, that'll get me one day ahead, because the dope will already be one day dry, especially if I can get an extra coat on tonight. So important to let the dope dry in between coats, so you don't build up all that thinner and you don't turn the finish into, the substrate doesn't turn into chewing gum along the way. Again, it seems like, I guess because of the weather outside, it seems like we're really in building season now. I don't even think about flying anymore. We're really getting into this project. Joe's been calling me every other day. We've been exchanging letters. We got Bob Martens involved in this with the plans, and just everybody that sent books in and pictures, and Frank McMillan, and it's what it should be. It's what modeling should be. It's a good diversion from reality. Especially when the reality is that the roof is blowing off your house or something. It's nice to be able to come down in a shop, put a couple hours in, get away from all that nonsense. I can't wait to hear the first Christmas song on the radio here. That's another thing that usually sets me off, and thinking about the trains in the village and building. It's always the time of year, at least for me, for the last, how many years? Winter time is a time I look forward to. I really do enjoy the building of the planes, even more than the flying of them. You never have to worry about what the weather is outside. You never have to worry about any other political nonsense things that go on in this event. You just can sit back, kick back with your friends, relax. It really is a nice time. You really could spend your life doing a lot sillier or less productive things than being involved in this hobby. Now what I always like to do is just dope over these little gear doors, the tip weight boxes, any of the little hatches and assemblies. The whole idea here is let that first coat of dope dry up, and then you can razor it right out. If you razor it now, you'll see right here, you'll start to see a little wrinkle out into the tissue. So again too, right by the gear doors, I like to get extra dope and press it down good. Make sure it gets a good bind. Because once we put some shrink dope on that tissue, it's going to want to pull this down. Get it pressed down real good. Now I really have to make sure I get a couple of things here. The edges pressed down, front edge. Now the other side of the wing is still a little wet. This tip right here where that concave is, I want to make sure both sides of that are pressed down. That's one of those areas I'm not so sure of. I want to make sure the trailing edge gets pressed down while all this dope is wet. I'll flip this over, get the other side wet at the same time. In fact, I'm going to get the whole wing equally soaked now, so this will actually be ready to hang up, put aside to dry. But don't be afraid to press that dope right down into the tissue. And of course, at this point in time, I guess I didn't even mention, at this point in time, try not to get any on the cap strips or on the, I got a little bit of the brush hit the edge there. It won't make any difference, but try to keep the tissue just as clean as possible. Right now, no dope. And we'll get the shrink dope on that once we get plenty on the outer edges and it dries. Now, one of the mistakes you can make is to try to rush this. And when this feels like it's dry, you put the shrink dope on, this shrinks up and it pulls this off. Not a good idea. This should always dry overnight, minimum overnight, before you go putting the shrink dope on the tissue. And don't put any on the cap strips. I've seen people try to do this, walk the cap strips. You always wind up with 100 little wrinkles. Now the only thing left to do here is I want to put about a 3/4 inch strip along the leading edge. I want to have double tissue along the whole leading edge. The easiest way I know of course, is just razor off a piece. Whenever you double tissue, it's a good idea to put it on wet so you get a good amount of flexibility. You can go around the curves. And of course I'll double right up in the front of the wing where it's going to be meeting the plywood doublers. I'd have that doubled too. There'll actually be 4 layers of tissue there. But believe me, this adds strength. And you can see we're almost, in fact almost is not the right word, we are out of dope. I'm going to have to mix up some dope so you can get a rough idea of how much dope went into this much of the project so far. That was 10 ounces. 10 ounces, that can't be right. 26 ounces. This is 1 pound, 10 ounces. And as soon as I get this out drying, I'll mix up some more. And while we're having our big day out tomorrow, this sucker will be drying. I love it, I love it. Let it dry. Always good to arrange your personal life around your modeling. Never let your modeling go around your personal life. You got to tell that wife, hey honey, we can't go shopping tonight. I can't do this or that because I got to get my dope drying. I'm sure that'll be the end of whatever marriage you have. Take advice from me. Be nice to the women. Look at what it got me. Karen treats me like a prince. Prince Albert in a can. Okay, that about does it for this session. We're gonna get out of here. In fact, I don't even need this last little bit. So if you've picked up some good tips off of this little segment, and I know you can, and if you have tips that I don't have, pass them on to me. Let's share the information. Now these are these Robart. We picked up, George actually donated some of these. Jimmy wanted to try this as a, I'm trying to picture how this would be this way, a Ray Brother linkage. Yeah, I guess that would work. It seems like this would be a reasonably good hinge. I don't know how strong these are, but again, you might want to just consider this. George donated a handful of them so we can see if they're going to be of any value. Cheap enough too. Anyway, we'll just check it out. This might, actually, I'm just thinking of other things you could use this for. It might be appropriate for you know, smaller models, profiles, prowler kind of models, where there isn't a lot of strain on the controls. Anyway, more to come. I know what you're thinking. I just happened to pick some more track up. Trying to plan out my village here. Anyway, enough of this. We'll be seeing that soon. What I want to do, I want to go check those parts, and if they're not tacky to the touch, because they've been drying in some relatively cold air, I'm going to try to give them one more coat of dope tonight. Now they've been drying for about 7 hours, so they should be, I hope, good and dry. Again, it's always a good idea to do a test before you go ahead and do this. Problem is, if you go over dope that isn't thoroughly dried, you skin over something that it's skinned over, and you start sandwiching in layers of thinner. And of course, it either doesn't gas off for a year, or it gets so chewing gummy you can't sand it reasonably. So let me go get a part in here and see. Again, always good to do it on a small part. I always radius the edge before you do anything. As soon as you get one coat of dope on there, radius all the edges off. This is all little things that'll help you get that. People don't understand that really beautiful finish that you see the top level people have. Ted Fancher, Bob Hunt, whoever you pick for your favorite hero. That comes from hours and hours of just picking away at the details and not skipping any of them. Now it would be very easy to go right ahead and just put some paint on here without sanding this at all. Yeah, okay. And just touching it. Now, you don't want to over-sand it. If you over-sand this, you're going to go through the tissue, and the tissue will delaminate. This looks like it's plenty dry. Everything's powdering and dusting off. So I'm going to mix up some more paint and get a coat on here tonight. This is my test, and it looks pretty good. Again, look at what the surface looks. You can see that the little fuzz in the tissue is coming up. I just touched that with sandpaper. Now, this is not a brutal sanding. Just touch it. Now that next coat of dope will lay that right down nice. Now another thing you may want to do is, I notice at the end of about 1 jar of dope, I try to clean the rim, because all this stuff winds up floating down to the bottom of the dope and around the edge of the cap. You might want to think about keeping that clean, or if you're really a big spender, you can get new jars every time you mix paint. That's another way of doing it. Okay, now what I'm trying to do is, if possible, brush one way, brush the other way. Then go on a 45-degree angle, 45-degree back. What that does, you don't get a whole lot of brush marks. Let me take a look at this up on a macro lens. A lot of times when you glob this stuff right on, you can see now it looks like, that's going to sink in. All the little hairs are going to just fall down. I'll bury that in. Probably the next coat of clear will bury that totally, and we'll take a look at it then. In the meantime, I'll do the same thing I did to this on all the little parts. As I'm going through these parts, I'm being very careful to at least touch all the edges with a sanding block. I don't want to lose any of my corners, any of my edges. This is one of the parts of this aeroplane I want to be at least as good as I can make it. All the corners, all the edges. And I'm trying to sand, roughen it up, smooth it out, but not go through the tissue, if possible. Now see, I'm real careful. I got the old machinist ruler with some sandpaper on it, even to get in all the corners and edges. And this is the point in time when you want to start hardening up and radiusing all these edges off. Every once in a while, it's a good idea to just look and see that you're not making any those little chewing gum balls. It looks like we've let this dry long enough, and we can get on to doing the big parts as soon as I finish it. This is the last of the small ones. Now, one of the things you can do is, while you have wet surfaces, you can look down and see if there's any rough spots, any low spots, by candling it, if you know what I mean by candling. Candling is you let light bounce off it. Right there, light is bouncing off it. that light spot is candling. When you do that, look for any low spots, high spots. See, I can put my finger in there and see a fingerprint. Well, that's what you're looking for, is anything right now that you could fill, fix, recreate, redo, whatever. Looks like there's a little low spot. Well, this is going to be inside the fuselage, but that's just a typical example. Now, one of the things I want to make sure I get is these edges here. I don't want to get these razor point thin. I want to get a nice hinge line fit, of course. I want to get all these edges out here. Of course, I'm doing all the same things on all the radius edges to get this ready for the next coat of clear. And just take a little bit extra time. Believe me, it pays off down the road. Now I have, obviously on these rounded spots, I'm going to have to do it either with a foam block or by hand. I haven't decided yet. I need to get in those dips. A little foam block is nice. And of course the foam block is nice on the leading edge. Just a piece of an old wing core. I've got double tissue on the leading edge, double tissue in the center section. I can really start to put some pressure on it now. All these curves, a lot of extra work, but I really have the feeling this is going to just add a nice dimension to this plane. And of course you want to try to blend the end of where one tissue is ending and where it's turning into double tissue there. That's a good spot to use a block. Now I can get rid of the tissue in the areas where I don't need it. This will allow me to get some dope down around the edges. Of course, what I want to do then is get the radius back on the blocks. Now what I want to do, I want to get one more coat of dope around the edges here. And I don't have any shrink dope. Joe is going to bring some down Saturday, I hope, when he comes. But I can get some clear dope on this tissue. Now, it doesn't matter when you put the 2 coats of shrink dope on, even if you're doing an I-beam or a D-tube, anything. It's only important that you get 2 coats on. I don't like to put, even under the worst conditions, put more than 2. I just feel like it just tightens the wing up too much, and then it's prone to warp. 2 coats, but you can put them on in the beginning of the finish, in the middle, or at the end, or you can even spray it on the top coat. But the problem is you don't want to get it anywhere except on the open bays. So if you had a way of doing that, of course, it would be very convenient. So rather than do that, what I'll do is I'm going to give this whole wing 1 more coat and let it dry. But now the whole deal is I want to get all the edges done first. We do this on camera. This is kind of significant. Now I want to start 1 bay at a time, go over the cap strip. I don't want to go back and forth and, you know, get a lot of brush marks in. I want to go one way, maybe just get rid of the brush marks, and that's it. Start at the cap strip. And try to get rid of as many of the brush marks as you can. And of course, the whole idea here is not to wind up with a bunch of brush marks in one direction or the other. Now, at this point in time, this tissue is going to look very fuzzy. All the little hairs are going to be jumping off of it and everything. I don't know just how if you can see that part is little there's one that isn't done. Little hairs jumping up all over the place. Well, we're at the end of this tape, and I'm going to be picking this up. I got a nice day of rest tomorrow. Got to go up and do my friend's train village for him and hang out with him, and I don't know what yet. We're invited to dinner, so I'll just see how it goes. Anyway, this will be sitting in the back room cooking away, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, is get this dope to all dry up so we can pick this up on the next tape with the filler, doing all the cap strips, the edges, all the little tricks of the trade that make for one of those awesome Joe Adamusco Spitfires. Spitfire. Spitfire.